You're listening to TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour with your host, the Director of Dixie Heritage, Dr. Ed DeVries.
Once again, always good to be back behind the Golden Dixie Heritage microphone to bring you yet another episode of TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour. And our guest on this week's show is Rick Hurst. Rick Hurst was the actor who played Cletus Hogg, Deputy Cletus Hogg on the Dukes of Hazzard. And Ben Jones, our good friend, who's been on the show here with us several times now, who was Cooter on the Dukes of Hazzard. Dr. Jones, Ben Jones, Congressman Jones, he goes by a number of different titles, but he likes to be called Cooter. Cooter, he sent me an email the other day, and it had Rick Hurst's cell phone number. And he said, you need to get Rick Hurst on your show. So I called Rick, and he was so excited to be able to talk with you today. Unfortunately, he received a phone call, and we had to cut that conversation short because his father-in-law went to the hospital in critical condition, and he said, I've got to go up to San Diego. I've got to take care of that. But he called me several hours later, and he said, if you can do the interview now, he said he was in the hospital waiting room. He was on his cell phone. He said, I know it's an awkward time. He said, but I'd love to finish the interview. And so we're going to roll that tape here in just a second. And let me just say what happens is he just jumps right into it. And so you don't actually get to hear me ask him the question that he begins the interview by answering. And so the question was about his first guest appearance in his career, which was an episode of the Partridge Family. And when I was a kid, I watched the Partridge Family faithfully. And so I told him, I said, with all the different TV shows I remember seeing you on through the years, how did I miss you on the Partridge Family? Of course, he told me, he said, well, Ed, he said, that was easy. I had a mustache in that episode. But when we start this second phone call here, which is the phone call that you're going to be able to hear on today's show, he just jumps right into answering that question without the benefit of me being able to ask it on the air. So anyways, without any more further ado, without me babbling on anymore, let's just go right into the recording of our interview with iconic actor Rick Hurst.
Hi. Want to turn it on? Are we on a roll?
Yes, sir, we can.
Oh, good. Okay. Partridge Family was great for a couple of reasons. First of all, it was my first guest starring role, which meant I didn't work just 1 or 2 days, but a guest star got to work 3 days. And that was great. And also because I met Edgar Buchanan. Edgar Buchanan was on the Partridge Family. We got to chit-chatting during breaks and stuff, and he was a very, very funny man, very wonderful man. And he used to say, well, in this business, you got to have a gimmick. I said, what? He said, in this business, you ought to find something that's to you, personally. You got to find a gimmick. Kind of like my voice. I said, oh, okay, I understand. He was a great outdoorsman. He was a dentist. But it was wonderful to work on that show. They were very seasoned at what they did and were very gracious and very happy to be able to be a benchmark for me, getting to be my first guest star role.
You know, another show that you were on at that time that was one of my favorite shows and that I totally missed. And it's funny because it actually was one of my favorite episodes. It's one of the ones that, when I saw you in the acting credits for it, it's like I specifically remember that episode. It was the episode of Sanford and Son where Lamont gets a crazy job moving a piano out of a high-rise apartment. And they knock on the door, and he's a really weird guy. He came off kind of as a homosexual type guy. And he was really particular about people walking on his carpet with their shoes on and different things. He was always chastising Lamont for being so disrespectful of his father during that episode. But you played a police officer in that episode, and I totally missed that one too.
I tell you, that was a great show for me. A great job. Primarily because I got to watch the two of them work together, and that was great. But the director of that show was a man named John Rich, who later and earlier had directed the Dick Van Dyke Show, All in the Family, and he did a show with me and 2 British shows, actually. We brought them over here and made On the Rocks and also Amanda's, the B. Arthur comedy. And they were actually British imports written by Ian LaFrey and Dick Clement. Those two guys wrote the shows in England, and they were big hits, both Amanda's by the Sea, which they didn't call it that, but also a show called On the Rocks. We called it On the Rocks over here. Over there they called it Porridge, which is a nickname for being in jail. I had no idea that little small part was going to lead to much bigger things. John Rich cast me several times in different pilots and in TV series. He was a very good director. He actually talked to the actor to make him more flamboyant, and he said, "Can you speak French?" And the actor said, "Yes." He said, "Okay, well, be talking on the phone to someone in French while you're bossing these guys around English." And it did make a wonderful character. And I had the time of my life watching Red Foxx and the way he worked. He's, an old vaudevillian guy, and he was just funny, just a terrifically funny guy. And John Rich knows comedy. He knows comedy really well. Yeah, he went on to direct a pilot that we did right after On the Rocks, which was another British import written by Dick Clement and Ian LaFrey. It was called Steubenville, but over in Europe it was called The Likely Lad. This was about two guys that were living in this flat and their adventures. So we made an American version out of it. Unfortunately, it didn't sell. Pursuant to that, I got to go to England and watch some tapings of shows over there, including The Two Ronnies, which was a wonderful, long-running variety show. Dick and Ian thought that I might make a good Oliver Hardy, and they introduced me to a man that they thought would be a good Oliver Hardy and Stan Laurel. They had a guy they thought would be a great Stan Laurel. So we met, and the man's name was Richard Beckinsale. I was happy to meet him, and they actually had me sing over the phone to some director to see if I could carry a tune. And we were going ahead with a project about Laurel and Hardy in Hawaii, some of their exploits and some of their trips and things. It was very unfortunate that Mr. Beckinsale died. We had just started to work on the show. And it's kind of ironic because now I'm watching his daughter Kate on a new show on Amazon Prime. And I keep looking at her and thinking about her daddy, who was a wonderful man. John Rich had a lot to do with getting me jobs.
Well, I see that these all began in like 1971, 1972, and of course, continued even into very recently. In 1970, you got your master's degree from Temple, and before that, you had a bachelor's degree from Tulane. I'm going to guess that neither of those were in the arts?
Actually, yes. The bachelor's, I first started taking pre-med, and so I had a psychology major. After a couple of years, I said, no, I don't think I'm going to go through the program for pre-med, but I'll become a psychologist. That would have been fine, but at the time, they were looking for research psychologists as opposed to clinical, where you have patients and you talk to them and so forth. I went ahead and got the degree in psychology, but at the same time, I added a second major in theater. As it turns out, theater can be greatly served by psychology. I mean, if you're an actor and you want to know what's going on with a character or in the script, psychology comes in very handy. So Tulane, did a lot of plays there and did a lot of musicals and earned a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and Theater. And the man I was studying with at the time, very, very good acting teacher, Tulane decided they were not going to build us a theater. They were just going to let us keep working in this converted cafeteria, although they had a world-class theater department. So all the faculty left my senior year. So when I graduated, I followed Arthur Wagner to Ohio for a year of postgraduate work, and then to Philadelphia to complete my master's in acting. They actually have an MFA professional acting program. That's what I took, and so it's actually I was planning to become an actor for several years in advance.
So did the degrees, I'm sure that they helped you as far as correcting and perfecting your art, but as far as actually getting a job, did they help you to get jobs, or is that just totally luck, skill, circumstance?
Yeah, they don't have a whole lot to do with actually getting your acting jobs. In other words, if you're called into a casting office, and the casting person doesn't usually get excited or care about where you went to college, unless it happens to be Yale or Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts or the British Royal Company or Northwestern. Sometimes they're impressed by that. But in my case, it helped me get a job while I was waiting to get acting jobs. I was able to become a substitute teacher, a high school substitute teacher, which paid enough at the time to keep food on the table. On the other side of that, the man I studied with, Wagner, I mentioned him. You've probably heard of a book called Games People Play, or maybe a book called I'm Okay, You're Okay.
Yes, sir.
In there is described transactional analysis psychologists use, and it is very helpful for an actor. Very specific. Diagnose the character and also the scene that's going on. You have words and a dialogue and a vocabulary to use to communicate what is going on a level that the actor then puts underneath the character, so that the character, you build your character on how he reacts to different situations and stimuli. So yes, my degree actually did help my acting.
Okay.
And helped me get a job.
Well, I know you did a lot of acting, and especially, I'd seen you all over TV during the 70s, even before I saw you on the Dukes of Hazzard in the 80s. One of the people you worked with early in your career was Dorris Day, and
yes.
She's somebody who a lot of our listeners would remember. What was Dorris Day like?
She was just the way you would like her to be, just the way you would think. That was actually my first TV job, my first film job. First job I got in Hollywood was a commercial, but the first TV show job was the Dorris Day Show, and she was delightful. She was very present, very professional, and has this really genuinely sunny kind of personality that and you just naturally love. So I enjoyed her very much, and I was very happy when they asked me to go back and play the same character. So that was a compliment, and I enjoyed that. Interesting sideline, that first job, the first time I did the Dorris Day Show, I met Denver Pyle. Denver Pyle was also on the Dorris Day Show.
I'm guessing he wasn't Uncle Jesse on the Dorris Day Show, though.
No, he wasn't Uncle Jesse. As I remember, I don't remember a lot about the show, but I do remember him being a nurturing advisor in some ways, family friend who was helping her with decisions. That's what I remember. He wasn't a bad guy. He was like family or a good guy. Denver and I were very close all the way through Dukes, partially because he had worked a lot. Denver had worked a lot with Andy Griffith. He'd worked a lot with Jim Neighbors. All of those men were managed by a man named Richard O. Link, who was a personal manager. He was also the executive producer of Mayberry and the Andy Griffith Show, and Matlock years later. I met Dick Link's daughter at Ohio University. We became friends, and he came up to Ohio, which was his alma mater anyway, to see some production and see some students there that had desires to go to Hollywood. So we put on a little showcase for him, and some of them came to Hollywood and some didn't, but I did, and he took me as a client and got me started. So it was kind of a nicely interwoven personal stories that go on in Hollywood. It's all quite personal, not so much alienation or separatism as you might think.
You were pretty busy there throughout the 70s. Of course, your IMDb credits are too lengthy to rattle off. Just as far as the shows that I remember seeing you on, the shows that I like to watch, and like I said, I probably watched way too much television when I was younger, probably still do. But, yeah.
That's hard to do. That's hard to do these days.
But if there were people like me watching too much television, guys like you probably would have had to have worked in a steel mill or something. So
That's right. I had to remain a substitute teacher.
Yeah. If you love listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, then I know that you'll love reading the Barnes Review. The Barnes Review is one of my favorite magazines. I began reading the Barnes Review long before they became a sponsor here on the program. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There's just not a more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So if you'll visit www.barnesreview.org, that's www.barnesreview.org, you can find out how you too can become a subscriber to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review by mail, or you can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review electronically in PDF editions. Or you can subscribe to receive both. That's what I do. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
I watch a lot of TV also, so we're kindred spirits there.
So I'm going to ask you, do you watch yourself on TV?
Not usually. No.
I know there are some actors who make it a point to watch their work on the screen, and some of them make it a point never to look at the screen product.
Occasionally I want to see how something turned out, a particular role or a particular job. Burt Reynolds used to watch the first few days of dailies just to make sure the makeup was okay. and that kind of became a practice. If you were on a long shoot like a film, you'd kind of go in and see how it's looking and see how the scene you shot the day before is looking and playing. But you don't go to dailies every day. And certainly there's no dailies to be gone to, really, in TV. They didn't do it the same way. So if you're in television, you didn't see the thing before it came on the air. And, yeah, there are some shows that I did watch, and I wanted to watch and see how it turned out. But as a rule, I don't make it a rule to see it, at least when it first comes out. But it's a strange feeling, I'll say that. When my second son was younger, 2 or 3, he and a young friend were over here watching TV, and I was talking with his dad, and the kids were playing. And then something came up on the television that had a picture of me in it, whatever they're watching. And they're looking at that. They turn and look at me, and they turn back to the television and look at the TV. And then they just looked up to me and said, "How? How? How is this possible?" So that was a very lighthearted moment.
So was that one of the moments that inspired your son to become an actor? Because I see that he's been just as prolific in the industry as you have.
Yeah, that's my older son. And my younger son, Colin, is also in the business and just had a really nice national commercial run a long time, one of those progressive commercials that don't turn into your parent theme, don't turn into your parents. But
so is he the husband in that commercial, the husband rattling around up in the attic?
No, but that's the right campaign. It's the other campaign where the 4 guys are going out to a nightclub, and the guy is saying, "Okay, everybody got their tickets, and here's a map to the club," and he's out there dancing and saying, "Come on in, guys, the water's fine," and then waitress walks by and he says, "Can I get a round of jalapeno poppers?"
Oh, I remember that one, yeah.
Well, Ryan actually, he was drawn to it just from the get-go. We never encouraged him. His mom was and is still an acting coach and has taught, some of the biggies and still runs a class. So in the summertime, instead of going to summer camp or something, when he didn't have a job and he had time, Ryan would go to class, to his mom's class. And here would be the actors that wanted to work on a scene, and Ryan would sit off stage and be the other character and read the lines for the person who's up on stage working. Basically, he kind of grew up in acting classes. And then also, very favorably, both my sons got to go to Santa Monica High School, where a professor there named Francis X. Ford was the theater instructor. He had been at USC, but he got tired of the brats, as he called them, and he wanted to touch base. He wanted to do things with ordinary kids and stuff. So both my sons got an incredibly wonderful theater education in the 4 years they were there at Santa Monica High School. I mean, they did productions at Nicholas Nickleby, for instance, a 5-hour play. They would do the current stuff and the big stuff. So they both got a wonderful education through the city school here. And the ironic part is, right after On the Rocks was on, or maybe while it was still on, go up to New York and do game shows. And $25,000 Pyramid was one of my favorites, and I did well on the show, so they liked to have me back. And as fate would have it, Frank Ford and I were partnered up on the $25,000 Pyramid, and we went all the way, and he won $25,000, which financed his degree, his Doctor of Letters. He financed his theater degree, his PhD. The money that we won on that show financed his PhD so that he could leave USC and come to Santa Monica and teach my kids.
Okay.
That's a pretty round the horn type of experience.
Your television career, and you were kind of living the dream, I guess. The Bob Newhart Show, Kung Fu, Gunsmoke, Kojak, Happy Days, The $6 Million Man, MASH, Chips, Little House on the Prairie. And that was even before you had the iconic role in the Dukes of Hazzard. What was it like to work with all of the big names? Obviously you would have worked with Telly Savales, David Caradine, Bob Newhart, Lee Majors, Alan Alda. I'm just thinking of all the big Eric Estrada, all of the biggies in the business.
Right.
You were working with them, and I mean, what was that like?
It was great. Got to work with guys who really knew the business and learned a lot from them. And before I move on, I'll also add, I agree with you about Ryan's resume so far. He's doing quite well, and very proud of him. He's people don't know that he's a comedic actor. He started out in comedy, and all he's done since is drama. But he's taken the old flag further up the mountain than Papa. So I'm very proud of him. He does fabulous work. To point, last night, for instance, he had his first episode of Walking Dead, which I have never watched. It's kind of gruesome, but he's another person that can do all sorts of different roles. He's not stuck in one category. Getting back to Telly Savales, for instance, was some of these roles in these shows. I didn't really have much time to interact with some of the people. John Caradine, for instance, I just didn't have a scene with, but I met him on the set, and he was very kind, very quiet, very much like maybe he was staying in character as he worked. Telly Savales was great. He, New York guy, he used to laugh and joke. And Kevin Dobson, who was playing his associate, it was his first series and one of his first jobs in Los Angeles. But Kevin Dobson went on to do many, many great things. That was his break, Kojak. Bob Newhart was a kick. He was wonderful. Very funny, very lighthearted.
I know I didn't, bring you on the show to talk about Bob Newhart per se, but I think the most iconic moment in television, or at least if I'm old and senile and can only remember one scene that I ever saw on television, the scene that I will remember, the final episode of Newhart, which was his latter show when he was running the bed and breakfast up in New England.
Yes.
And the last episode of that show, he's having this nightmare. and the lights come on, and he's in the bedroom from the set from the original Bob Newhart show that was set in Chicago, and Suzanne Plachette is in the bed next to him, and she says, "Bob, what's the matter?" He said, "I just had this horrible dream. I've been running a bed and breakfast in New England."
That's great. I think I remember that. I remember because everybody wanted to see the last episode. It was one of those things, and it was hysterical. That was very funny. They beat Dallas to the punch of having it be a dream, right?
Yeah,
having the whole series be a dream. Well, he was a terrific man, and so much on the side of actors, and that's this doesn't always happen. That when you come on a show whose show it is, the star of the show, they can get pretty concerned with just the show and their part, and rightly so, because of their name's on the door. But they also sometimes disregard the other actors. But the best ones in the business, has been my experience, are friendly and helpful, and it's just like playing golf, man. You see somebody out at the golf course, and you shake hands with them, and you know what they've gone through getting this far in the game of golf. Same with acting. No matter how big a star you may be or become, you will always remember what it was like for you getting started and being where this other person is now. Helen Hayes once said something very interesting that it's true. She said, actors are by nature generous people. He gave a good performance. She gave a good performance. It's that act of giving and sharing that is special to our trade in a lot of ways. I think when we employ that in our work, certainly that's the way it was on the Dukes of Hazzard. I know we'll talk about Dukes in a minute, but that's one of the things that made our show tick there, was the generosity of the performers. Oh, Happy Days was fun because I was in the pilot of that. They made 3 or 4 pilots.
One of the things that I caught in Happy Days that I guess nobody else realizes, and I tell them this, and they're like, I don't remember that. The first season of Happy Days, Richie and Joni had an older brother. The second season, they just wrote him out of the show with no explanation. It was like he had never been there. And then when you watch the reruns in syndication, they never show that first season with the older brother. It's like, wow. It's like he was George Orwell written out of existence by Winston Smith, kind of a thing.
It's funny how that happens. Funny how you can just lose somebody so fast.
Yeah.
There's the old story about Jimmy, what's his name, Dynamite.
Jimmy J.J. Walker.
That's it.
Yeah.
His show was at the height of its run, and he was at a Christmas party or a cocktail party, and so he went up to producers and said, "Hey, listen, I'm not getting enough money on our deal. I don't think I can work under what the deal you've presented to me. So I think I'd like to get off the show," which is a ploy, of course, and then they go back to the negotiating table. But in this case, I think it was Sheldon Leonard turned to his attorney, who happened to be right there at the party, and said, "Hey, Bernie, Jimmy wants off the show. Can you take care of that for me?" So that's the reality, that you can get lost quickly. Happy Days was, I just played the guy that would have been running. This was an outdoor, not a 3-camera indoor show, but it was an outdoor 1-camera show, and I was playing the owner of the drive-in, but when they moved inside, they got someone else. But it was great fun to be on it, as it was with, looking at your list here, Little House on the Prairie and Highway to Heaven. Michael Landon was very, very down to earth and very much aware of his family, his crew. He was the one who, if there was excess money left over in the budget at the end of the year, which producers typically save for themselves, he would give it all back to crew. He was the only person I ever saw that did that, give back the money to them. Plus, there was just something so playful and so genuine about the guy that made you comfortable as an actor, being directed by him, too. Little House is one of my favorite roles because Michael Landon went on the Tonight Show to publicize our episode, which was about, digging out in a rock quarry with big sledgehammers and chipping away at big pieces of rock. So he went on the Carson show, and he brought a hammer with him. And they showed a clip of Michael Landon hitting me on the head with a sledgehammer, and Lay did the sound of clank, clank. And actually, of course, it was a rubber sledgehammer, but you couldn't tell in the clips. It was very fun to have your head banged on the Tonight Show.
I guess
read all about it.
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are because you're listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net and find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
Read all about it.
I guess we're mean to our audience. I don't know. I know that our audience is probably tuned in because they want to hear us talk about the Dukes of Hazzard, and yet we've made them stay tuned in for over a half an hour now in anticipation of that.
Uh-oh. Well, better
but
take care of business.
But I think most of our listeners would probably remember you, of course, for your time on Dukes of Hazzard. How did you get that role?
I auditioned. I'd been working out here for a while. A friend of mine that went to Tulane at the same time I did, who was also in the theater department, had been stuck there for a year or more. He needed to pass a science course in order to graduate. This man also happened to be the one who directed the campus musical every year, and it was open to the whole campus. It wasn't just the theater department. So I knew him from having worked with him on some shows. I helped him pass Chemistry 101 so he could graduate. Unbeknownst to me, he became a unit production manager on the Dukes of Hazzard. He recommended me to read for Cletus. I read for the director of the week, Mac McDougall, and it was actually Mr. McDougall that had me read it again and read it not like a drama, but like a comedy, because we didn't know what it was at that time. And he said, yeah, that's more like it. That's it. Thanks to Al Salzer and to Mac McDougall. And I guess I should also mention Sonny Schroyer's appendix. They needed somebody to fill in for Sonny while he was having his appendix out and fixed. I came in as Cletus, but not as a cop. And then when Sonny came back, they spun him right off into his own show. So they made Cletus a deputy to hang around and get upbraided by Roscoe and Boss.
So Enos, I remember, like you said, he got his own spinoff, and then that spinoff, I think it lasted like 18 episodes, and then he came back to the Dukes of Hazzard. So was that when you were kind of started to be written out of the show then because they didn't need two deputies on the cast, or how did that work? Because the show went on for 3 more years after you sort of fell out of it.
Right. Well, you're right. For a while they tried it with 2 deputies, and that was a little too much. Having Roscoe and 2 deputies was a little top heavy. But the fortunate thing is, at just that moment, I was offered to be on the show with B. Arthur, Amanda's by the Sea, from my old friend John Rich. So actually, I moved from Dukes right straight on to Amanda's by the Sea I don't know, 6 weeks, maybe 2 months, I was getting paid 2 checks.
Okay.
One for the money they owed me on Dukes and for the money I was earning on Amanda's.
Well, I remember you were a character named Earl Nash, and you were kind of like the cook at her bed and breakfast in that show.
Yes, that's right.
Although it was only a show that I had watched a few episodes of, I was a kid at that time in my life, and it just wasn't the kind of show that I that I got into.
Right. It was word for word with the same script that they shot in England, and they just made changes to make it more generic. It was very well received in England. It was called Faulty Towers, and it starred John Cleese. Well, it wasn't as funny, I don't think, as the British version, due to a lot of things. One of the reasons was that Bea herself was going through some unfortunate times. Her husband had just divorced her to meet with or be with a younger girl, and that didn't sit well with Bea. So we had to make some adjustments in that, but I enjoyed that show. I thought it was so tight because they'd done it before. Comedy-wise, it was written and scaled perfectly.
Right.
But it was tough for Bea to be doing all of that at the same time.
Well, I want to go back to Dukes of Hazzard, but I do want to ask you one more question about Amanda's, and particularly about Bea Arthur, just because Bea was always very much an activist for a number of different causes, and she was kind of an icon for some of those causes. Did she ever bring that onto the set, or was she all about the acting and the business on the set?
That's a good question. Actually, she was very professional. She was just about the business on the set. She would never talk about her views or feelings about things, though we may have known about them. She never proselytized or brought any of that, not even to the lot, let alone the show, backstage or wherever. That was never part of the Bea Arthur that we all saw. We saw the lady who wanted to make this show work and how hard she worked at it, how clever she was. It was wonderful to watch the things that she would come up with, and very professional.
So what was it like? Of course, your role on Dukes, you were Cletus Hogg, so you were Boss Hogg's cousin?
Cousin, yes.
And so what was it like to be Boss Hogg's cousin, or just to be one of the Hoggs?
Oh, man. Well, that was a slippery slope there in Hazard to have Boss Hogg as your boss and last name is a Hogg, having to put up with Roscoe always abusing you as well. Boss would kick Roscoe would kick me. I had the friendship with the Dukes, though, because we were the same age, and we'd gone to school together, and we knew each other before I was a deputy. And I remember saying all the time, well, wait a minute, now listen, remember, I am only 1/8 Hogg. So there was many more parts of me that are kin to the Duke family. It was great because I could be friendly with them. It didn't have to be Martinet that Roscoe had to be. And Boss, we just acted as if we were family, and he in his own boisterous style, and me in my younger style. I'll tell you a funny story though. You remember the movie Dirty Harry?
Yes, I do, with Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, with Clint Eastwood. Kenny Johnson, the guy that played the bad guy at the other end of that gun, when when Eastwood says, "You feel lucky." Well, that actor was a guest star on Dukes of Hazzard, and there was a scene between Boss, Mr. Johnson, and myself. So I come down. It's on the set, so we sit in 3 chairs and we start rehearsing the scene. Well, Boss and Larry knew Japanese, so they were rehearsing the scene in Japanese. The only reason I could ever tell when it was my turn is they both look at me. Oh, okay. So now I say this, and they nod and they go back to Japanese.
So is that just something that helps them as part of their process, or are they just trying to keep things light on the set, or?
Yeah, they were just keeping things light on the set and enjoying the fact that here are two guys in the same show at the same time that just both happen to know Japanese. Wonderful morale. Sora was such a Renaissance man. I can't say enough about him. He did speak 5 different languages fluently. He was in counterintelligence in the Korean War. He did graduate from Columbia and Yale. And he had almost a photographic memory, or probably did have a photographic memory. I mean, there are tales of him having to check a script before we shot it to make sure we're not contradicting ourselves with something else we said, in last year's shows. So, he was a very intelligent but extremely witty and funny guy. He also conducted philharmonic orchestras, which I never knew. That was one of his hobbies. But boy, you'll never meet a nicer, friendlier, down-to-earth person than Sorrel Book. We used to be on the same airplane going to weekend car shows, and so we got to spend some time chatting about stuff, and he never pretended, tried to impress anybody with how smart he was or this or that. He was just wonderful, wonderful man.
Of course, Sorrel Book is no longer with us, and neither is Denver Pyle. I know Ben Jones, of course, is still very much alive and active, and in fact, he was the one who gave me your phone number. So obviously, The two of you have maintained a friendship, but are there any of the other cast members of the Dukes of Hazzard that you're still maintaining friendships with?
That's one of the things of this show that I think just is a testimony to how and why it has survived in popularity thus far to this 40-year mark. Genuinely, and we are all very close friends on the set, and we are still close friends today. We can tell you who stubbed their toe and who's got a cold, maybe by rumor, but we stay in touch. We also see each other at different events around the country every year, so we're very much in touch with each other. There is a camaraderie there. There's something about this show binds us together. There's something about it, the joy that we had making the show, and the reverence we had for the luck of being cast on the show never ever got to our heads. To this day, each one of us will say, "Yeah, I'm very grateful. I am so lucky to have been part of this." So we have somehow maintained that kind of attitude all these years, keynoted by Ben Jones, I have to say. When we were filming the first reunion movie, between shots, we were sitting in the Hazard Square on the curb, and that's when I met his wife for the first time, Alma, and Ben hands me this yellow baseball cap that's got Cooters stamped across the front of it. I said, "What's this?" He says, "We're going to open a general store in Hazard." I said, "What?" "We're going to open a Hazard County general store." Except for the fact that Ben was the only man to call the shot about Dukes being here 25 years later, outlasting CBS's estimation of not past the first commercial break. I had to believe him. And by golly, he has done that. And by opening these Cooter family stores, one in Luray, Virginia, one in Nashville, and one in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, it has given the fans and folks who are familiar with Hazard a place to come and relive it, because it's like walking into a time machine when you go see all the memorabilia and all the posters and things. So a large part of Hazard Nation, which has only gotten stronger year by year, has to go to Ben Jones and his wife Alma. Together are the heart and soul of Hazard Nation. They are together a force of nature.
Going Breaker 1 might be crazy, but I ain't dumb. crazy cooter coming at you. Hey, y'all, got your ears on? Well, I got some news for you. We're here at our brand new Cooters in the Country store in Sperryville, Virginia. Good old Sperryville, where Cooters started many years ago. Folks are coming from all over Hazzard County, and we're going to have a grand old time with good music, good food, and best of all, good friends. Hope y'all can be there. Whoop, whoop, here come Enos. Huck got Cletus with him. I'm down and I'm gone.
I have to give Ben and Alma a great deal of credit for keeping the name alive, for putting on Dukes Fests, for putting on other functions where people can come and share and be part of that and show off their own General Lees. So this show is not even close when it comes to actors going their own way. In Walton's Mountain or Star Trek, they have big conventions and so forth, but I don't think they have the interpersonal telegraphs and going back and forth. And just to be honest, there was something, as soon as I read the title, you just got a little chill. There was something special about this thing from the get-go. And boy, what fun we had.
The North Carolina Heritage Political Action Committee was organized by concerned citizens of North Carolina in 2015 in response to the increased attacks on North Carolina's history and heritage. The North Carolina Heritage PAC supports state and local candidates for public office who pledge and show their support for the protection of Confederate memorials and the preservation of all of North Carolina's history. We all know that Confederate memorials and symbols are the easy targets, and that the end game of our leftist enemies is to erase and rewrite all of history, from the colonies to the War on Terror. If we fight them for our state's rich Confederate history and heritage, we may be able to stop them from their mission of total destruction. Join the North Carolina Heritage PAC now by visiting ncheritagepac.org. Once again, that is www.ncheritagepac.org. And help us on the front lines of North Carolina politics. The mission statement of North Carolina Heritage PAC is that the North Carolina Heritage PAC was created with the purpose of supporting diverse efforts to defend and preserve the heritage, traditions, monuments, cemeteries, flags, emblems, and other legacies of North Carolina history against those efforts to remove, deface, legislate against, alter, and otherwise corrupt or pervert their meaning, history, presentation, and standing in our state. Once again, www.ncheritagepac.org. Of course, you mentioned the General Lee, and the General Lee has now been castigated because of the Confederate flag. That's, because of that, they've even gone so far as to take TV Land, and some of the other networks have taken the Dukes of Hazzard out of syndication. They're no longer showing the reruns on television. That was a big body of your work. I mean, that was a big chunk of your career, and maybe even the thing that you're best remembered for and were most loved for. And, now people can't even watch it on television. I mean, how does that make you feel?
Well, it makes me feel sad, and also we have to learn what doing the right thing is, just like they would do in the Dukes of Hazzard. I mean, it's unfortunate that they took it off because of the flag.
I know when I was a kid, every Friday night, that was just the thing you did. You watched the Dukes of Hazzard. And I grew up in Chicago.
Oh, you did? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
and knew a lot of people, black kids went to school with, and so forth. They all watched the Dukes of Hazzard too. People get offended at the flag being on the General Lee nowadays. When I was younger, I don't remember anybody being offended by it. So, obviously, it wasn't a political statement that any of you were making. That's something that's kind of being imposed upon you after the fact, by... Yeah.
Being imposed upon us as a result of a political and ghastly act that was singular in its presentation, singular in its moment. No, it really is unfortunate that, just like you say, there was never a question of race in Hazzard County, and we never had any problems with that. And this recent development, again, the more we celebrate and highlight acts of violence and mass killings and more of that, the more we advertise that and do things like, because this man held a Confederate flag up, take a flag off a car of a TV show, it simply means that we have not learned to put that aside. Don't pay attention to that. Not to glorify those people, not to put it on the evening news so someone else will feel like, wow, if I go out and do something like that, I'll get to be on the evening news. That kind of problem that our show, I think, addressed very well in its day, in so much as Boss Hogg represented greed and the Dukes represented love. And in our show, somehow or another, love always came out on top. Love always belittled and did away with the baser qualities, like greed. Dukes was about doing the right thing. Uncle Jesse had a moral code that was imparted not by standing on a soapbox, but by deeds that were portrayed on the show. So I look forward to a day when you can put anything you want on a car, on a building. Well, fortunately, the show is still alive on DVDs, and it is still alive on Amazon Prime, where, you can pay to watch it, which is a little weird since you can't watch it for free, but if you pay for it, then you can watch it, and people do. It's still out there. It'll remain out there for a long, long time.
One of the things that amazed me about your career through the years, of course, you were Deputy Cletus on the Dukes of Hazzard, but you played so many different characters before that, and you even played many characters after that. You were with Clint Eastwood in The Line of Fire. You were Bart Boone in Steel Magnolias. You were the announcer in The Karate Kid. Santa Claus with Urkel in Family Matters. You were on Murder, She Wrote, The John Larroquette Show, The Wonder Years, Evening Shade. So you did not get typecast after the Dukes of Hazzard either, which, some of the other characters did, but you did not. And so you have this wide assortment of characters that you've played through the years, dozens and dozens of them. In my mind, you'll always be Cletus Hogg, you'll always be Deputy Cletus, and probably to a lot of our listeners, you'll always be Deputy Cletus. But what character will you remember yourself as?
That's a good question. First of all, I will be happy to be remembered as Cletus anytime, any place. That's definitely a compliment. And it seems to have spread. I was playing golf not long ago with a friend of mine, and the people behind us hit a golf ball up into where we were. And one of the people I didn't know was playing with us and picked up the ball and threw it back to him and said, "What are you doing hitting into us, Cletus?" So it has become a word or a state of being. I was lucky to play a lot of different characters, a lot of different roles. I'm slowly but surely putting together a little book of essays and poems and things.
Are these essays going to kind of be an autobiography or?
Yeah, they will be about people that I've known and have spent time with, But there's also going to be poems in there.
So when do you expect that to become available?
Next year sometime.
Do you have a website where people can kind of keep up with what you're doing and read some of your poetry? And
I have a place on Facebook, Rick Cletus Hurst, and also under Richard Hurst. But once it's completed and so forth, I hopefully we'll be able to sell it wherever we go around the country with pictures, and then at that time should be able to manage a way to put it up so people can get it if they want.
Well, I definitely hope that you'll let me know when that goes up, and we'll promote it on the show.
Hey, thank you, Ed. You bet I will. Absolutely.
So what are you doing now? Are you retired now, or are you still working from time to time? Or
yeah, I'm retired. But like a lot of other people, still paying the mortgage and raising kids, even though the kids are adults.
So I've got to ask you a question because I was the guy who played one season of minor league baseball and didn't go beyond that, and now I'm the dad who goes to my son's games. I follow him around now. Are you the actor dad who now follows your son around from set to set, or?
When I can, yes, I have done that. when he was on Sons of Anarchy, that was right out here in the valley, in San Fernando Valley, and I used to go out there, and my younger son would go with me, and we've dropped in on some of his sets, but he'll be shooting another series out here in Los Angeles. It'll be on Amazon Prime. It's called Bosch, Bosch, and it's a successful show. It's been on 7 seasons, and it's the story of a detective, a private detective, and Ryan's going to be one of his resources, his confidential informants and so forth. So I hope I get to go over there one day and see what that's going like. But yes, I went to all the plays. I went to all the football games, all the baseball games, and if there was ever something called a helicoptering father, I guess I would be it.
Okay.
Other than that, I play golf occasionally. We're getting ready to start a tour here. Something has come up that the name of the company is Muscle Kings Car Show and Concerts. Now, these folks have been in business for a long time, and they're very successful. Well, they got the idea of why not partner up with the Dukes cast to go to these locations all across the country this summer where they ordinarily have car shows anyway. They've launched it. The tickets are now being sold on Facebook at musclekings.com, also at the goodoldboystour.com. The first 2 are going to be here in California, which is nice. The first one's going to be in Bakersfield, April 13th. The second one is in Irwindale on June 15th. And they're stringing up another 8 or 10 shows, which they haven't quite yet announced where they're going to be. So that's going to keep me busy. And I do stay pretty busy going to car shows and autograph shows. There's a lot of people out there that still remember, like, and enjoy the Dukes. So believe it or not, I'm working almost as much after the show as I did during it.
Well, I definitely do appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, especially I know you've got a lot going on in your personal life right now with your dad and everything, but I definitely appreciate you taking a little aside out of that to talk with me tonight.
My pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure. But I have to thank you, sir, Ed, for the show you do and for the interest that you pay attention to parts of Southern life, and I think that's wonderful, and I am so flattered that Ben recommended me to be on your show, and I truly want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about some of the best stuff that's ever happened to me.
Well, I thank you, and know that our prayers are going to be with you in the next couple of days, and if you are ever in Florida, my cell phone number should have come up in your caller ID. Keep it, and if you're ever in Florida, maybe we can go play a round of golf together, and between the two of us, maybe we can, chop some divots in the fairway or something.
Sounds great. In fact, your number is already in my phone, so I've got it in my contact list.
That is all the time we have for today's TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour, so I'm going to go ahead and cut the conversation. There wasn't a whole lot after this anyways, just a little bit of conversation about maybe Rick and I playing a round of golf when he's in Florida for an upcoming car show. But I know that you enjoyed that conversation with Rick Hurst. I know I definitely did. Somebody who I'd been watching on television for a number of years on a number of different television shows, and it was good to be able to talk to him and get to know him and hear his perspective on a lot of these different shows and the people, of course, who he appeared in them with. One of the first movies that Rick Hurst ever made in his career was a movie called W.W. and the Dixie Dance Kings. And it was a movie he made with Burt Reynolds. It was one of his first movies. It was one of Burt Reynolds' first movies. A great movie, very, very pro-Southern movie. Just good old-fashioned Southern entertainment, if you will. And at some point in the past, we made it available to our newsletter readers, the Dixie Heritage Letter. And so what I'd like to do is I would like to make a DVD of W.W. and the Dixie Dance Kings available to our TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour listening audience. If you will send a gift of $20 or more to Dixie Heritage, we would like to send you a DVD copy of W.W. and the Dixie Dance Kings, starring Rick Hurst, and Burt Reynolds. If you'll just email me, director@dixieheritage.net, and say, hey, Dr. Ed, I heard your offer on the radio show. I'd like to get a copy of WW and the Dixie Dance Kings. I will tell you how to send that $20 contribution, and we'll get that DVD right in the mail to you. I know that you would enjoy watching that movie. It was just one of those great movies. And I would like to thank you again for being our guest this week on TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour, and encourage you to come back again next week and listen once again. Until then, from all of us here at TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour, God bless.